What's good, everyone? 1 year later, I can't believe it, but here we are discussing the PR-4000 Power Rack from Rep Fitness a year after having received it and setting up my home gym. For those of you who have followed me in the last year, you'll note some differences in the way I have the rack configured, particularly with where I've positioned some of the weight horns, but I'll cover some of those issues as I go along. Let's start from the ground up with what I consider the platform for this power rack, and these are two standard horse stall mats from the Tractor Supply Company, and these are 4 feet by 6 feet. I have these stacked side by side, so I have an 8 foot long by 6 foot wide platform. Now let's talk about uprights. These floor joists that hold the main floor above are 83 inches in height, which required me to go with the 8-inch uprights for the rack. Another question that was asked was the height between the cross members. So from the top of the lower cross member to the bottom of the upper cross members, that's 68 inches. So I went with 30-inch cross members, which I find perfectly adequate for my use, helping to keep the footprint down, not too deep, and certainly not too shallow. Has been perfect, no issues whatsoever. Now let's talk about this rear bar stabilizer. This is necessary for creating stability between the uprights from left to right. Has been fine for a flat bench, but it can cause an issue with incline bench. It limits how far back you can push your bench. So to demonstrate an answer to a very popular question I received regarding doing incline bench within the rack, I have my AB5200 as far back as it goes. The wheel guards are touching the foot plate on the lat low. Even if I remove the foot plate, the stand for the AB5200 will come into contact with the rear stabilizer bar, preventing it from going back even further. Doing incline would actually have to utilize the front posts with the JCups that I have here, which is an unnatural way of racking and unracking the barbell. But as you can see, the barbell on the rear posts is out of reach. Even if I lower the barbell, I'm overextending my arms behind me, creating potential injury to my rotator cuff. So that basically rules out doing incline bench within the rack. My solution is just doing incline bench outside of the rack by putting my JCups on the outside, using my spotter arms as a safety mechanism, and I'm able to do incline bench outside the rack. If you intend to do incline bench outside the rack, I definitely recommend getting the spotter arms, which are relatively inexpensive attachment. The inability to do incline bench within the rack would be the same even if you had the 41-inch cross members, because the limiting factor is the rear bar stabilizer and not the footprint within the rack. Now the question about whether or not to go with a 4-post rack like I have here or a 6-post rack depends on the space you have. For me, I went with a 4-post rack because of my small footprint. This is roughly a 300 square foot space that I designated for this gym. So for me, I could go with an extra 2 posts at the back for weight storage. However, I didn't want to create extra limitations with freely moving around the rack. And right now I feel like the 4-post rack is ideal for me to be able to get around, take weights on and off the weight horns on the lat low row. If you have a large garage space that you're intending to use, you could go with a 6-pack, not a 6-pack. You could go with a 6-post rack easily. For me, I wanted to stick with a 4-post rack, and I will say honestly that I had the extra 2 posts in my shopping cart for quite a long time as I considered adding on the additional 2 posts for weight storage, just because I had some issues with where I originally had my weight horns for weight storage on the rack, impeding movement. Without space restrictions, 6 posts should be fine. Now, if you're considering including weight storage on a 4-post rack like I have here, you have to be strategic about your positioning of those weight horns, because if you're not, you can have interference problems where the weight on the weight horns interferes with range of motion for different exercises. Another factor to consider is the positioning of the weight horns relative to height and ease of use. So this is an 80-inch rack, but I'm 6'2", so getting weight on and off this top weight horn in the very top corner is not a problem. But if this were a 93-inch rack, even my height would make it difficult to get heavy weight on and off of that weight horn up there. Now originally I had some weight horns aligned all along the rear post, but that became a problem with the weights that were in the middle of the post because it interfered with range of motion for bench press, especially when it came to racking and unracking the bar. So keep that in mind, which is why I have my weight horns at the top corners and only one for the 45 plates at the very bottom of the post, because that doesn't interfere with any of the exercises. However, I did have to place some weight horns and weights on the rear of the rack on the very rear post that the lat low row attaches to, just to keep some of the weights out of the way and preventing them from interfering with range of motion of different exercises. So I keep 25s in that back rear corner. They used to be in this front corner, but as you can imagine, the extra diameter of those 25-pound plates would interfere with the weight plates on the barbell when I was doing squats. I do also have some additional weights on the rear bar stabilizer because that doesn't interfere with motion of the weights on the lat low row going up and down. Ideally, if you want to have that kind of implementation, keeping the weight that you would typically put on and off the weight horns for the lat low row would be perfect. Now I also used to keep some weight horns on the bottom of the front post, but the weight horns protruded from there presented a hazard when walking around the rack, so I had to remove those. Additionally, that change allowed me to put the landmine right in front of the weight plates on the rear post, giving me the freedom of movement I needed without coming into contact with other plates or the weight horn at the front. So that is to say that it is possible to have weight storage on a 4-post rack, but you have to be very strategic and careful about where you place them. And the other factor that comes into play is the height of the uprights that you're using. 93 would give you a little more freedom with where you can place weight horns on that post. So at this moment in time, my current configuration is storing 3 10-pound plates at the top left and right corners of the front posts. I have my 225s on each of the rear posts in the very corner. And then I also have 2.5 and 5-pound change plates at the rear brace that the Rep logo attaches to. On the bottom of the rear bar stabilizer, I have 135 and 110 on each of the weight horns there, and those 2 plates do not interfere with the motion of the lat low row going up and down, even with the larger bumper style plates on those weight horns. On the bottom of the left and right rear post, I have 4 45-pound plates on 12-inch weight horns, and that has been perfect. If I decide to get more 45s or 55-pound plates, I have enough room on those 12-inch weight horns to add those to the same weight horns. And that's pretty much my configuration. When I'm doing squats, I do take off the 10 pounds just to allow me to move and get the bar unracked from the rack without having the interference that I demonstrated. Otherwise, that position is perfect. Now, the last thing to consider when including weight storage on a 4-post rack is ensuring equal weight distribution from front to rear. If you're using a pull-up bar, for example, and you have lots of weight on the front, that could end up tipping the rack over. This is the standard matte black for the 4 uprights, and then I went with the red pebble tone for the cross members. Everything else that you see in red here was custom powder coated, and you can see my video on customizing colors for your gym if you click on the card up here. Now let's talk about the lat low row attachment, which is by far my favorite attachment because it provides a huge amount of versatility, creating a lot of variety in the exercises. Now, one of the questions that I'm often asked is how much space the lat low row takes behind your rack. The footprint would be the same for a 4-post or 6-post rack, as the 6-post typically use 16-inch cross members, so that post would line about right here. Whether or not you go with that length for cross member wouldn't really change the footprint of the lat low row. Rep Fitness lists the extra length behind the rack at 27 inches. When you factor in 27 inches plus half of the diameter of a 17-inch weight plate, you end up with roughly 35.5 inches. So I typically tell people who ask how much space they require behind a rack to just give yourself 3 feet or 36 inches. That will give you a little bit of extra room behind, really half an inch or so behind the plate, to be able to move the plates on and off the weight horns freely. Also, if you want to be able to move behind the rack and the lat low row, you want to give yourself a little more space than that. Now, one person had asked me about going with 24-inch cross members rather than 16-inch cross members. Just remember, anything longer than the 16-inch would probably interfere with getting plates on and off. For example, choosing the 24-inch cross brace instead of 16 would roughly align that rear post with the weight horn. With that rear post lining up with the weight horns, you'd only have roughly 3 inches of space from the edge of the weight horn to the post, making it difficult to get plates on and off here, or at least very challenging. So that's one of the reasons why I decided against going with the extra 2 posts, because I do enjoy the freedom of getting the weights on and off the weight horns without any interference. Now, when it comes to the additional height requirements of the lat low row, Rep Fitness states 3 extra inches, and that is right for the cross member here. However, the one thing that's not being factored or stated is the additional ½ inch of the pulley that protrudes from the bottom and the top of the cross member. So you really want to allow 4 inches of extra space to give you ½ an inch of space between the top of the pulley wheel and your ceiling. And that's the same whether you go with 80-inch uprights or 93-inch uprights. For 93, you really want to make sure you have at least 97 inches of height between your ceiling and the top of a lat low row pulley system. Well, now, one other thing that I'll note is that having this extra lat low row attachment does create some extra weight and stability for a 4-post rack. So I really never felt the need to have 6 posts to create extra stability. And the addition of weight storage and the lat low row being attached to this 4-post rack, it creates a rock solid stability, and it's never been a factor for me, even though it's not bolted to the floor. Another question I received is the length of the upper brace for the lat low row, and that measures out to be 36 3/4 inches. And the amount that protrudes over the rear cross member is roughly 7.5 inches. Now, the one point you'll definitely want to consider when putting this together, if you are limited in ceiling space, is to make sure that you have enough space to lift this up into place once it's put together. I didn't have a lot of space, so I had to build it in the forward position with this top brace leaned down on the floor, kind of like a bird face down, and then I lifted it back into place backwards because I knew I only had enough space for the back of this cross brace, whereas if I lifted it the other way, this being 30 some odd inches, the front part of this would have come into contact with the ceiling long before I got it into place. As far as free range of motion with the lat low row when using 80-inch uprights is concerned, it's never been an issue for me even though I'm 6'2". The lat low row is configured at an appropriate height for this height rack, and it never interfered or limited my range of motion in any way, shape, or form. Doing standard lat pull downs while seated on the bench, I get a full range of motion. It adds a lot of exercise variety, allowing one to change things up a bit. Aside from the typical lat pull downs and cable rows, you can do low rows, you can do tricep push downs, curls, preacher curls, single arm or double arm, lean away lateral raises, leg raises, easy bar, skull crushers, and more. Now the front stabilizer feet are definitely a worthwhile attachment. They're relatively inexpensive, and for the price, it's definitely a no-brainer to add them to your rack, especially if you're going to have a front mount pull-up bar. The extra stability created by the front stabilizer feet is a nice insurance policy to have to make sure you're not putting yourself at risk. Additionally, that extra 24 inches has never interfered with my mobility and movement in and around the rack. It's definitely worthwhile, and as you can see from this footage, I'm definitely able to do my deadlifts on the mat without the front stabilizer feet interfering. The weight plates sit outside the front stabilizer feet, allowing for a little cushioning and sound deadening from the floor mats when placing the weights back down on the floor. They add 24 inches to the front rack depth. The addition of these feet make my total depth from front to back of my rack as it is configured here at 89 inches. Here the standard pull-up bar can be mounted at any height between the uprights. However, if you're going with a multi-grip pull-up bar, those have to be mounted to the cross members, so the height of that will be dictated by where your cross members sit. The nice thing about going with 93-inch uprights, if you do have the ceiling height, would be the ability to mount your standard pull-up bar at any height. So even if you're short and you have a 93-inch upright, you can still place the pull-up bar in a place that's appropriate for you to be able to grab easily. But again, having a multi-grip pull-up bar like this has to be mounted to the cross members, so that height is dictated by the cross member height. If you have a 93-inch upright, this is going to be roughly 90 inches in height. When you have 80-inch uprights like me, this ends up being more like 76 to 77 inches in height for the pull-up bar. And yes, this creates a little bit of an issue where I have to bend my knees for full range of motion at the bottom, but otherwise it has not been a problem for me. Now, since I do have all three JCups offered by Rep Fitness, I can speak to each of these. My favorite being these round sandwich JCups due to the beefiness. There are 3 layers of UHMW in here, and they do protrude beyond the plate itself, giving you that extra protection for your barbells when you're racking and unracking them. As you can see, these also have a twist function with one pin, and you swivel them into place. My next favorites are the flat sandwich JCups, and I prefer these for bench press because this front lip here does not protrude as much as it does with the round sandwich JCup. If you're going for as many reps as possible, getting that bar over the extended front piece of the round sandwich JCup could be very challenging. So I do prefer the flat sandwich JCup because it's only an extra inch of height that you have to get the bar over. These are also pretty heavy duty, not that huge and bulky, and they come with the stainless steel Rep logo plates, which I had powder coated, but these have been nice. I do want to note that Brandon had an issue with his where the rubber was very soft and compressed under a lot of weight. I don't really bench that much. I've only gone as much as 275 pounds, and this rubber style UHMW has not presented a problem for me compressing and potentially damaging your bar with the metal on the sides. That problem has been resolved by Rep as far as I've heard, so just understand it when you're factoring which JCups you're purchasing. The last JCup to discuss is the traditional JCup that you see here holding the barbell. Now, I understand most people don't favor these, but they are inexpensive and just as effective as the other JCups. The issue comes into play with this rise in the JCup here where the bar would rest against once it's in the JCup, and this rise is probably 2 inches, and that makes it a little more challenging to get the bar over, but additionally it can interfere with the range of motion when you're passing this JCup for overhead presses, for example. A lot of times your bar will come into contact with that metal, potentially damaging a very expensive bar. My solution to that was obtaining these 3D printed plastic JCup protectors that fit perfectly over these Rep JCups. And you can find these JCup protectors on Etsy. I can't remember the individual name, I apologize, but they are very effective, and if you do have these traditional JCups from Rep, I do recommend seeking these out on Etsy. The only other factor about these that does make them a little less desirable is this flimsy rubberish UHMW that you can see coming away from the back of the JCup. These were on all 3 portions of the JCup, and the bottom ones had a tendency of spinning and moving and raising, also creating an issue with potential damage to your barbell. I ended up retrofitting mine with some old UHMW that I recycled from the strap safeties, and there's a video that I have on that. If you're interested, you can click on the card up here. Otherwise, these JCups are just as effective and inexpensive, so worthy of your consideration. The next attachment I want to talk about is the leg roll attachment. Relatively inexpensive. This is definitely necessary when doing heavy lat pull downs, otherwise your butt will rise off of the bench. I've also found extra uses for it where I use it for Bulgarian split squats. I also use this for decline sit-ups on my AB 5200, attaching it to the rear post. It pins down my feet, allowing me to do the decline sit-ups without problems. Finally, I also use this to hold my ankles down with Nordic ham curls, which are very difficult. And that too has been really fantastic because the padding is very effective. Spotter arms. They're another fantastic option for several uses. They can hold down your barbell for pendlay rolls, floor bench presses, hip thrusters, and more. I also use them to hold my dumbbells in between sets so that I don't have to reach all the way down to the floor. They can be used on the inside of the rack as well, so if you're considering the flip down safeties, you could likely get away with one or the other if the rack depth is appropriate for them. Flip down safeties. Awesome, very effective, very strong, but I honestly don't use mine because they're redundant for me. I have the spotter arms, which I work with outside the rack, and I prefer using the strap safeties inside the rack because they allow for a little more flexibility and positioning. If mine were the newer models that had the holes inside, I might actually use these a little bit more because I could use them with band pegs, but right now they pretty much sit in my closet. Strap safeties are my favorite because they allow for a greater deal of flexibility when it comes to positioning. You could put the front part of the strap safety at a different height than the rear, as you can see I have here, and that allows for making adjustments incrementally, especially if you have west side hole spacing like I do with the PR-4000. These are very effective, very strong. They were recalled at one point because they only had welding on 2 of the 4 sides, but I never had an issue with mine. If you want to see the videos on either of those, you can click on the card up here. Again, I like these because of the flexibility and positioning. I've never had an issue. They've saved my butt on a number of times with both squatting and bench pressing. With bench press, when I've had to rely on using the strap safeties, the bar settles into place and I'm able to wiggle myself out of the bench. In fact, I do prefer doing bench here. I do not like benching at the commercial gym because they don't have safeties like this in place. They have these commercial grade benches, which are great for the most part, but I feel much more comfortable benching heavy with my strap safeties here. At the gym, they have lower hooks as safeties, but that still requires you to have the strength to get the bar up to those lower hooks to save your butt. With these, you can go all out, and if you fail at the bottom range and you can't get it up an extra inch, I know how that sounds, but if you can't get the bar up at all, the safeties will definitely save you. And as I've said and demonstrated, these have been very effective at holding some serious weight. There are also many videos on YouTube where they test the strap safeties, and they have been proven to be very effective. The Landmine attachment, another great and inexpensive attachment for the rep racks. I honestly haven't used mine as much as I'd like this year, but that's due to the programming specifics that I was using. Now that I'm on a power building program, I am utilizing this more often. The only thing I will say is that it is a little bit rough on the inside, like most Landmine attachments are. So I would recommend using it with an inexpensive barbell, just in case you don't want to really damage an expensive barbell. The nice thing is that this takes both Olympic and standard barbell sizes, so you could use it with a cheap standard barbell as long as you have the appropriate weight plates for that. It tucks up nicely against the side of the rack, never really creating a safety issue for you. Weight horns, definitely a value-added accessory, and I do use all of mine. I have found that I prefer the 6-inch versions over these 12 inches, but of course you want to have at least one pair of 12 inches for your heaviest weights. This still gives me enough space to add a few 50-pound or extra 45-pound plates if I decide to purchase more. I do use the 6-inch weight horns for my 10 pounds, my 25-pound plates, and also my change plates, 2.5 and 5-pound plates. Actually, I also use a pair of 6-inch weight horns at the back of the rear stabilizer bar that you can see here, holding a 10 and 35-pound plate. Dip bar. Definitely a worthwhile recommendation, also under $100, and I definitely recommend it whether you get the Rep version or the Rogue Matador Light version like I have here. I only went with Rogue simply because Rep didn't have it in stock when I was looking for them, and there's a video that I have. You can click on the card here for a review of these Rogue dip bars. So what are my overall thoughts? All in all, I'm very content with this PR-4000 rack from Rep Fitness. This rack has literally saved my butt during the lockdown, being able to use it anywhere from 4 to 6 days a week. Since getting the rack and gym set up, I've made some serious gains with various programming. The 4-post rack provides incredible strength and stability, and the safeties inspire confidence. Here I'm able to go all out and push myself to the limits, knowing that I'm safe at all times. I can squat as heavy as I can, knowing that the 4-post rack and safeties will catch me if I fail, and I have several times. Same with bench press, where at the gym I would have had to let plates slide off the barbell in an embarrassing moment that catches everyone's attention, whereas here I let the bar go and the strap safeties take care of the rest. No harm, no foul, and no shame in my game. This alone has allowed me to push very hard, making some gains that I'm really surprised by. My designated gym space is rather small, and this rack has fitted nicely, giving me a lot of bang for the buck considering the small footprint. I do wish I had the ceiling height for the taller 93-inch uprights at my height of 6'2", because that would allow me to do pull-ups without bending my knees, as well as doing standing overhead press within the rack without having to be on my knees as I've demonstrated. However, the 80-inch uprights haven't really impeded my ability to make gains, and in the last year I've found ways to work around those issues as I've demonstrated, and I'm truly happy with the option to have 80-inch uprights to begin with. Not a lot of manufacturers create racks with this height, so this option of 80-inch was right there in the sweet spot, perfect for me. As you can see, it gave me a little bit of extra headroom over those uprights, allowing me to do pull-ups and getting my head closer to the ceiling. But I've really done quite a lot with this PR-4000 rack. As you see, it's configured, and I have absolutely no regrets with the purchase or this rack model itself. Would I do anything differently if I were to purchase today? Probably, and that would be going with the PR-5000 rather than the 4000, only due to the consistent hole spacing that the PR-5000 provides. There have been occasions when I'm trying to find the right height for the leg roller attachments or the spotter arms, and the odd hole spacing has presented a little bit of a challenge finding that sweet spot. And it's just a matter of practice to find the hole that you need, and once you do, you become accustomed to those and you find what you need relatively easily. The PR-4000 was slightly less than the PR-5000 and certainly a lot less than the Rogue rack. However, that's not to knock anything that Rogue makes, because I do like their products. If I were to do it again in this given space, I would probably go with the PR-5000 just for the consistent hole spacing that rack provides. But I truly can't see any situation where the 5/8" hardware that the PR-4000 uses creates any kind of weakness. In fact, I think this is truly just as strong as a PR-5000, but again, it's just a matter of different hole spacing and different accessories due to those hole spacings. The affordability of the PR-4000, even over the PR-5000, allowed me to set up the gym with extra accessories, extra barbells, keeping the cost to a relative minimum, because it's very affordable, even in the configuration that you see here with pretty much most of the accessories that they sell. Additionally, those cost savings allowed me to round out the gym the way that I wanted, with accessories like the Echo Bike, a heavy bag, extra barbells, and so on. If I had gone with a more expensive rack like the Rogue rack, it definitely would have caused me to cut some corners. Do I have any regrets with this rack? None whatsoever. I planned it out to fit in a designated space, and I customized it just the way that I want it, and it fits me perfectly. So 1 year later, and I'm a happy camper with my PR-4000. If you're someone considering a PR-4000, I can say without any reservation, I absolutely recommend getting one. Now, unfortunately, this video has probably turned out to be longer than I anticipated, but I hope I was thorough in answering the many questions that I received over the last year. But if I've missed anything, or if I haven't answered anything thoroughly enough for you, please drop a question in the comment section below. That's pretty much all I have to say about the PR-4000 after a year of use. This rack will outlive me for sure. But in the meantime, I'm going to get the most I can out of it. Now, if you like this video, I appreciate a thumbs up. And if you're not already a subscriber, I urge you to consider subscribing. In the meantime, take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.